Welcome back, everyone. So I was doing some work with a student the other day, and they were asking me about how do you do an API integration when there are credentials, like when you have to have a username and a password and you have to integrate with this API. How do you actually go get requests? And then funny enough, I was doing some work with a client, and we came across this really cool service, which is this one on the left here called OneTime Secret. So we came across this because with the client, we needed to send either OneTime Pins or basically a secret that we pass a message onto a user for the client, and then the user views the message and it basically explodes. It's very cool. And it's cool for passing OneTime Pins, like I was saying. It's cool for passing temporary things. So just for example, this website, you just enter a secret message. And I'm not signed in right now, but you can normally tell them, you can say, I want to send this to a specific email address, and then that email address will receive a link, and then they can go view this secret, and then it explodes. You can only see it one time. But for now, we'll just use the regular way. So you see, it generates this one little link. You view that secret once, and then that's the message we just sent. And now if we want to view that again, that same email link, it's as if it never existed. So literally, it explodes. And the cool thing is, this website, this service, also has a API, because that's how we wanted to do it. We wanted to be able to make requests to this API when we can do it from our server with our web application, and it's all part of the flow. So I thought this would be a great example to show everyone, because the student, like I was saying, he wanted to know how to make requests when credentials were required, and this is exactly what this API needs. You have to have a username, you have to have a password. So it's a great example because it's gonna let me teach you some really important things when it comes to environment variables. And like I said, it just adds a bit more onto API integrations. It shows you the situations when it's not just a public API. So it's the environment variables, and then also being able to make requests with the credentials. So if you look to the right side of the screen, you can see I've already created a directory for our project. I got that open in our PyCharm. You know I love PyCharm. And empty, nothing there. And if you know me by now, I love myself some environments, like virtual environments. So I'm going to create a virtual environment for this project. Let me call this OneTime Env. And then, as usual, I'm just going to activate that environment. And again, you'll see I'm doing the exact same things I do in a lot of my videos, is that I've created a virtual environment because I want to be able to keep the requirements and the modules I use for this project separate from the other ones, because maybe they have different versions, and it's just always good practice. And then I've installed requests because that's my classic. I'm a big fan of requests, and that's it. Okay, so let's click back to our PyCharm. So obviously we need to start building out this client now. So just to quickly mention, so this API, they actually have a client already built out for Python. So we could, if we wanted to, just download this and use what they've built. But I think it's really good practice to do it almost from first principles. So doing it just with pure Python, using a request library, and you learn some of those more basic underlying concepts. So we're just going to do it from first principles. And as you see here, what I do with most of my projects is we look for, okay, we've got the base API, the base URI for the API. We've got a couple of endpoints. So one, this is the one I'm going to use right from the start, is just to make sure that we've implemented things correctly. And then the second part of the API is this. So this is where we actually can create those secret messages from the API, and we're going to also be able to send that to a user using the email address, so they get this destructible message, which is very cool. And then we're going to be able to do some more stuff with it as well on our side. So let's create a file. Okay, and as always, I always bring in login. And you see I'm always doing the same thing over and over pretty much in my projects. And pretty much for every API, you've always got a base O. And that's going to be our base O, taking it from there as usual. And now, like I said, I always follow that process of we establish the basics of login and import the libraries we need, got the base O. And now we want to make sure we've set things up properly. So we're going to start by making a request to this first endpoint. We're not done yet though, because obviously we need to set up the credentials. But I'm just getting the functions and things in place. And always doc strings, you want to have a way that you can indicate to yourself and other people working on your future client or on your future projects what these things do. And obviously it doesn't do anything yet because we need to still add these things out. And remember, for each function, this is basically going to represent one endpoint that we're requesting. So we have our endpoint here, which is going to be API v1 status. I have a feeling this v1 part is going to be repeated over and over, but we'll just say that's the full endpoint for now, because we can probably include that v1 as part of the base O, just to cut down on a couple of characters. Okay, and you saw I quickly imported the OS library because I love to use the path join function, because basically that just handles all of these forward slashes and backslashes for us. Now if you remember how requests work, we're going to do a get request to this endpoint. Set your response. Now if you guys have been paying attention, you'll see we still need to include credentials for this. So if I had to make this request right now, this is going to break. So then this is when we're going to start introducing the environment variables. So basically environment variables is you have these specific information, these variables specific to a user that you more than likely do not want to include in your actual code base. Basically you don't want to hard code it. That's the term we use. You don't want to hard code it because firstly, if these are important credentials like a username and password and someone gets access to your code base, then now they know your credentials. Or if multiple people are working on the project and say each person uses a different username and password, you actually have to make changes to the code base, which makes no sense at all. Like you don't want to have to do that. It creates a headache for everyone. And it's just bad security. So environment variables are key. So if I had to show you what an environment variable is quickly, just in the terminal. So environment variable is essentially this. In your terminal, if I say echo, which is just a print, if I say echo our variable, that's going to return nothing because we haven't defined our variable as anything. But if we had to say export our variable equals this now as a value, we've basically just defined our first environment variable. So you guys can pat yourselves on the back. And now if we had to echo that out, that would do something. And just to push home the concept a bit more, if I had to do this from my Python interpreter, so if I run, so I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but this is how you access environment variables from Python. So now we've just accessed that first environment variable that we created. So now we're going to take that concept of, we're going to provide our username and password, this username and password right here that we want to keep secret. We're going to provide those to our script via environment variables. So obviously we need to be able to fetch that from the environment right now. And obviously I haven't exported the environment variables yet. I haven't actually defined them, but this is how we're going to access them in our program, in our script, and then we're going to define them in our environment as API username. And obviously we need a password as well. It's generally a nice practice to make the environment variable and the variable you put it in as the same name, just so it makes it easy to follow the code logic and you understand a bit more of what's going on. So now we need to pass these credentials to our request. So you can see here, this is actually done using basic authentication. So there's lots of different types of authentication you can use, but I'm not going to go into details on that. I'm just going to show you the basics quick. And I actually already have the page open because I don't generally remember all this stuff. As long as you know where to look for it, it's all good. So you can see here, request.get, they've got their endpoint, meaning their full URL. We've built up that full URL using our endpoint and our base URL. And now if we want to add some authentication to that, we've got this here. Okay. So now obviously we don't have user and pass, but we've done those in our global variables. So we're going to use those there. Now, if I had to make a request, this should all go good. Just a quick point, this API returns JSON. You can almost always assume APIs are going to return JSON because that's just very much the standard these days. So I'm going to say response.json. And as we know, JSON is a great little helper that requests give us, the request module gives us, and it will just convert whatever we get back into a Python structure because we know it's JSON. So let's quickly test that to push our point home. Okay, so if I had to try run the script right now, this wouldn't work because I haven't defined the variables that we actually need. So if I wanted to export variables, API username, so now those are defined. If we had to run this script, we would see them in the project. Obviously it's still going to break, but what we can quickly do is, just to show, we can print these two things out. So when I import this script now, if I say hyphen and run our OneTime client, there we go, it prints out the username and the password we just defined. So now I'm quickly just going to jump and export my real credentials, which I'm not going to show you guys obviously, so I'm going to remove those, and then we're going to make those requests that we want to do. Alright, so we're back. In a couple of seconds, all I did was go export my real username and password for the OneTime secret API, which obviously I got because I went and signed up, and you just get the credentials from there. And what you guys also might have seen is I misspelled that request there. So if you've been following along bit by bit, I just misspelled that. So if you had to run your project even with having exported your credentials, it would have broken just because I misspelled that. So just quickly fix that up. And then now, if you've seen what I do a lot of the time is I am going to import this entire client. I don't import the individual functions, I import the entire client, and we use that as a complete structure, because that means now we could use this in other projects. It's all like wrapped up into one thing. It's very nice. So now if we had to call this, we should get back a nice little JSON response. And there we go. So I mean, that is literally all you would really need to do in theory to get an API integration working that has those basic request credentials. And I obviously spoke about how the environment variables play into that as well. So the environment variables, again, are what we've defined to our system. We've told the system these are variables that can be used, and then in our Python script we fetch those variables from the environment, literally the environment that our computer is running on. And in this case we do it because we don't want to be exposing this username and password. If someone had to get our code, or if we wanted to open source this, you'd have your credentials in your code. That's obviously a bad thing because everyone can access your stuff then. And if other people in your team want to work with it, or you have different credentials that are based on a development environment or a production environment, you're going to run into these headaches of having to actually make changes in your code to work with these different environments. But instead you can just export different credentials via the operating system and your environment variables. But so I'm going to take this one step further and not stop at just getting the status. Let's actually be able to create a secret. So actually I'm going to say send secret because we're going to do this with an email. Okay, and also normally I would say if not email, I'd raise an exception of some sort, like no email provided. And like I said, I haven't fleshed out this function yet. I've just done the doc string as we normally do, the return. And now if you have been paying attention, we've got to go find the endpoint and also see what else this request requires. So now if we click over to the secret section, okay, so if we look at to create a secret, we want to create a secret. They've got some other cool ones, so you can burn a secret, you can retrieve metadata, but we're going to do the one that we came here to do. So to create a secret, we can see there that v1 is part of the base L, but I'm just going to leave it in there for now. But the part that we want to add on is the share part. So again, our endpoint, we've got. And now we're just following the same structure over and over and over. We're doing the same thing we do every time. Endpoint. And this function literally just repeats itself essentially. But obviously we're going to be sending data this time instead of just getting. So that needs to change, but we're still getting JSON back. And obviously you can see if we wanted to go implement all of these functions, we would be repeating the same things over and over a lot of the time. So you could also start thinking of ways to convert a lot of this repeated code into a separate function, and then you call that function without having to repeat the code over and over. But here, so we're actually doing a post this time, we're posting to an URL, still the same URL, we've still got that authentication requirement, but in this case what's different is we obviously have a secret that we want to send, and we have a recipient. There's other cool stuff here, like you can make the secret only last for a short amount of time before it explodes. You can give a passphrase that they also have to enter, but for now keeping it very simple. So actually I forgot here, and we also got the message that we want to keep a secret. So if not, So it's not the best message, but I'm just throwing it in there for now, because now if one of them were left out, it wouldn't be really obvious which one someone needs to complete. And I'm just quickly adding that new parameter to our docstring. Okay, so request lets us add on things as parameters, as query parameters. So query parameters is when you see the little question mark after an L. So for example, query parameters, everything you see after these question marks. So it could be like A equals value 1 and B equals value 2, value 2. You can pretty much do whatever you want after this question mark, and all of these are query parameters. And quite interestingly enough, this is how this API likes to pass that information. So in this case, we've got our email, which is our recipient. That's a query parameter. We've got our message, which is going to be our secret, which is a query parameter as well. And we want to pass that to our request function. And we do that as part of a dictionary. So recipient. Okay. And it's really easy to pass this to request. So we just add as params equals params. I just named it the same thing because it's kind of the convention. And now we're going to go test this little thing. Okay, so I've got this temporary email address just to make life a little bit easier for testing. And now we want to go test and send a message to ourselves in this email address, which is like a self-destructing one like we're talking about. Alright, so let us import the client. Okay, let's define a message we're going to send. This is a cool message. Our recipient is going to be this temporary email address. Let's just make sure we've got our parameter names correct. Email. Alright, awesome. The message came straight through, and I've just blocked out the email address because that's who it came from, and it says you have a secret from that person. Just open up so we can get to the link. Okay, cool. So it's from blocked out person to the email address we said, where it came from, and we got a secret. Awesome. So let's open the secret up. View the secret. Yeah, and there's the message we got. And now if we wanted to send that again, if we wanted to view the secret again, what's going to happen? It's gone. So yeah, awesome stuff, guys. So like I said, this again was a fun one that a student came to me with. He wanted to know how to make requests when you had to give credentials. And then I also came across this cool little service. So it was a perfect opportunity to show you a cool service that you can use in some of your projects in some way, and also how to do some more, not technical, but just integrate with an API that isn't as straightforward as a public one. And again, we had to do that using environment variables. We didn't have to, but it's good practice to do with environment variables, obviously. Alright guys, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave any comments below. If you had any problems along the way and you need some help, just drop a comment. If there's anything you want me to go over again, or any topics that you want me to explore with you guys, just drop it in the comment, like I said. And don't forget, we still got the top Django and Python mistakes that beginners make. The free guide is still available in the link below. So yeah, click through, and I'll see you all next time.